Welcome to our session, Good, Better, and Best Practices in Museum Collections Care. I'm Nicole Harvey, and one of my roles here at the OHS is to administer the Oklahoma Heritage Preservation Grant Program. So we're really excited to have a professional development track this year at our Oklahoma History Conference. As you can see, the session is a traditional Zoom meeting rather than the webinar, and we're asking everyone to go ahead and mute yourself during the presentation portion of the session. But we do want this to be somewhat interactive, with folks having an opportunity to ask plenty of questions and engage a bit with our panelists. So with that in mind, I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists, and we're going to get this session rolling so that we have plenty of time for questions and discussion. We have four wonderful curatorial professionals that make up this panel. We have Karen Whitecotton, who currently serves as the Director of Collections for OKPOP. I got muted somehow. Okay, I'm back. Okay, Karen is a Native American museum professional with both her bachelor's and master's degrees in museum studies and has over 20 years experience in registration and collections management. Jennifer Holt has been the curator of collections at the Will Rogers Memorial in Claremore since 2007, and she is a past president of the Oklahoma Museums Association. Mallory Covington currently serves as the archival collections manager for the research division at the OHS and is a certified archivist. And she's worked at the OHS since 2011. And Jeff Briley currently serves as the deputy director at the Oklahoma History Center. He's worked at the OHS for 31 years. And he said to describe him as the things guy, the artifacts guy, the three-dimensional guy. And if you ever get an opportunity to go down to the basement with Jeff Briley to talk about our collections here at the Historical Society, you are in for a wonderful treat because he makes every one of our artifacts just come to life. So that's our panel there. And
good, baby.
This four main pillars of collections care. And the first one's going to be documentation, and that's going to be Karen Whitecotton, who's going to do that section for us. So Karen, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Do you have, I can't remember if you have a screen. Okay. No. All right.
Okay. I'm going to turn over the admitting to you now. They're still joining.
Great.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about documentation, and really just what we're wanting to do is talk about just the basic things you can do to get started. And if you don't have the fancy databases and that kind of thing, just what do you need to do your job? So really the most important thing when it comes to documentation is, well, one, documentation, but backing it up. I can't stress that enough, that you need to have a system in place to back up whatever it is that you're creating, whether that is digital copies or hard copies. You need to be able to have extra copies somewhere on site and then off site. So if that's flash drives, external hard drives, whatever that is, and you need to make a schedule. Is that once a week? Is that once a day? What is that? So those are things you need to think about. Paperwork wise, creating paperwork is everything to what we do with collections management, and you need to store that paperwork in a safe place. And you need to not only just document the history of the items themselves, but that's how you determine also legal ownership. You have to have documentation in place. And something you need to think about is if you know that you have these objects over here that were on loan from 2014, but you don't have paperwork for them, if something happens to you tomorrow, you have no documentation on your collection now. So it's things like that don't be the only person to know about your collection. You need to write everything down and record things. So that's really, really important to do. The next step would be to create some type of file system and tracking for organizing your paperwork. So if you have hard copies, which I suggest always having hard copies and digital copies, you'll want a file folder system. And I usually always track at least donor files, and then I try to make object files as well. So And then I make a checklist for each donation. So when things come in, I have a checklist, like if I have, do I have a gift agreement? Do I need to do a condition report? Do I need to finish accessioning the piece? So I just have this checklist that I keep a hard copy with each donation. And that helps me stay organized and know where I'm at if I have dozens and dozens of pending donations. And if you don't have a database, which, you know, we all strive to do that, but if you don't, at least have something like an Excel spreadsheet. That is better than nothing. And I will tell you, I do have a database, but I also use Excel for everything. You can track inventories, you can track donations that way, loans, you can track exhibit case contents, pest management, anything and everything really you can track in Excel. So that is a really good place to start if you don't have the funding for a database. Inventories are something else that are really important, and it's really one of those things that can be super overwhelming. So my recommendation is just start somewhere and make a plan. Just how many shelves do you want to do a day? And, you know, at some point, eventually you'll get through everything, but you just need to make a starting point. An inventory should at least have the type of object, like, is this a chair or is this a necklace? It should have the accession number. And if you don't have the accession number, you need some type of temporary tracking number. You need a date for the inventory and the location. Another thing you should do is always take pictures. And if you can't take pictures of individual objects, I would take a picture of the shelf, at least some type of physical representation to go along with that inventory. I'm getting close on my time, so I'm going to hurry through the rest of this. Forms, any type of form that could be considered a legally binding contract, like a gift agreement, I always recommend having legal counsel look over these things and approve them first. But some forms that you need would be a gift agreement, incoming and outgoing loan forms, a temporary deposit form, which is something if you get like doorstep donations or, you know, people dropping off things, having them sign something where they're leaving it in your custody. Other things like Oklahoma actually does not have a abandoned property law for abandoned property for museum collections. So the Oklahoma Museums Association put together guidelines relating to unclaimed, undocumented, and abandoned property to help with best practices. And there's my little time right there. Nicole, can I finish this out real super fast? Okay, so policies and procedures are something else that are really, really, really important to have in place for collections management. And you need a collections management policy that backs up your mission statement and helps you talk about what you collect, how you take care of it, who has access to it, amongst other things. And other things like you should have a collections plan that helps guide your collecting focus. And then things like code of ethics that help you outline ethical behavior regarding your institution and your collections. So I know that's a super, super, super fast and down overview of some things, but at the end, after everyone's gone, we'll have time for question and answer so we can get into some of these a little bit deeper if you want.
Thank you so much, Karen. I am going to go ahead and switch us over to Mallory Covington, and she is going to talk about storage and supplies for collections. Let me spotlight her. How do I? Yeah, there we go. Okay.
I do have a PowerPoint.
So this is the reason why it's not a celebration for us. Understand that. This is a win for the Floyd family. We send our sincere condolences, and we're going to keep trying it as we can to give as much information as we can so that you can make an informed decision on what is happening in this country. But it is working, and you should feel.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about housing and storage for your collections. It's going to be just a very, very, very broad overview because we could talk about this for days and days. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is supplies. So housing your collections, the watchword you're going to want is acid-free. That's going to be the very best that you can do for your collections, but acid-free supplies can be expensive. So some other things that you can do is store things in non like cardboard boxes. So the boxes that your Amazon packages come in is not the best. So if you can find like, a lot of times, you know, Michael's and things have boxes for photographs. They may not be acid free, but it's better than storing them in cardboard boxes. You can do envelopes like manila envelopes. You can do mailing envelopes. They're not great for long-term storage, but it protects them from light and the elements and things. And you can also do Ziploc bags. Usually I kind of leave them open a little bit so you can get a little bit of air circulation, but those are great that you can put things in, you know, to keep them dry and to keep them protected from being squished and crumpled and things. So for things of a artifactual nature, you can use foam for supporting hats and headdresses and things that have cavities. And then you can also use things like sheet protectors for photographs, letters, things, but you want to stay away from the PVC or the polyvinyl chloride, which a lot of times you can tell those because they smell and they kind of feel rubbery. So you'll want to stay away from those. And there's just, you know, tons and tons more supplies, but those are just kind of basic things that you can use. So for best practices, you're going to want to use acid-free, or sometimes they call them museum quality cardboard boxes, along with acid-free folders. And they do sell acid-free plastic, which is called Mylar. And you can get it in pre-cut sheets, or you can get big rolls of it and cut them yourself. You can use things like unbleached muslin for textiles, or rolling things, and acid-free tissue also for rolling oversized items or for creating storage for different items. And then one of the best things that you can get, especially for archival collections, is a pH pen, which I will show you later. And that's the way you can tell whether the paper that you bought is actually acid-free. It doesn't work on plastic, unfortunately, but pretty much anything paper, you can use that and check to see whether it's acid-free. So this is just some examples of supplies that we use. We have the acid-free photo envelopes. Staple removers are an archivist's best friend. You want to get rid of everything metal. So we carry those and we buy them in bulk, and we love them. So there's also some examples of Mylar, and then we also have cotton gloves. You can also use nitrile gloves. There's a, you know, everybody kind of has their own policy on glove wearing. A lot of places are getting away from it. We still do use gloves here for the protection of our collections. And then just more supplies. We've got CD sleeves. There's a little strip of paper mending tape, which I don't use a whole lot because I don't really know in 100 years time if it's still going to be acid free and if it's going to turn the paper yellow. So I would use that sparingly. But there are ways that you can mend your ripped paper with the acid-free tape. And the little purple pen there is the pH pen. So this is the Abby pH pen, and this is how you can tell if your stuff is acid-free. And I'll kind of go into a little later, but there's not really any regulation on what can be considered acid-free. So they can really slap acid-free or museum quality on anything, and there's not really any regulators to say, yes, this is acid-free, or no, that's not acid-free. So this is a really great way to tell, and it's not the same thing as the money checker pen, so don't get them confused. We have had that come up in the past. So these are just some places that you can buy supplies. You can go online and buy them from archival suppliers. They tend to be a bit more pricey, but if you get a grant or something and you can buy in bulk, those are really great places to go. But if you need little things, or you just don't have the budget for the more expensive stuff, you can also go to places like Michael's, Hobby Lobby. You can go to scrapbook stores because most of their stuff is acid-free. You can find stuff on Amazon. And then some places like Office Depot and things will carry sheet protectors and stuff that are okay to use. And this is just an example of an Amazon comparison, so you can kind of tell what you're getting into. So the Amazon Basics one says that it's acid-free, and polypropylene is okay to use for archival stuff. But if you really can, you want to look for in the highlighted box where it says it's passed the PAT or the photographic activity test, because then you know that it's been tested to be acid free and it won't mess with your materials. So as we get on to shelving, you really want to stay away from wooden shelving. If it's used, because sometimes, wooden shelving is all we have. So if you do use wooden shelving, then it can be sealed with a polyurethane, or you can also put plexiglass on the shelves to protect your collections. So plastic or metal shelving is good and it's the best. But you can also use metal filing cabinets for storage of especially documents or little items. So for environment, this is one of the most important things in your storage. Is you really want to try and keep it as stable as possible, even if you can't meet the best practices for humidity and temperature. You just want to make sure that it's not fluctuating all over the place. A lot of formats for archives and museum items have different temperatures they're better for them, but a lot of times you have to keep everything in one room. So you just want to kind of keep it in general between 25 to 60% humidity, and keep it around 60 degrees. If it gets too cold, then things get brittle. And if it gets too hot, then you get mold. So you can also go online and look at that. But this is a way that, if you're keeping things either in your house or if you've got an untemperature controlled storage area, these are just some kind of general principles. I think that was it for me.
Okay, if I can figure out how to spotlight poor Mallory here, and it's not working at the second. Oh, here we go, remove spotlight. Okay. Thank you so much, Mallory. And our next speaker is going to be Jeff Briley, who is going to talk about housekeeping. And Jeff, I muted you earlier, so you'll need to unmute yourself before you start doing your thing here.
All right, here we are. Can you hear me okay? All right, terrific. Housekeeping is just a necessary evil, and some places are easier at it than others. Here at the History Center, we spend a terrible fortune every year on filtration for our HVAC system, but it really pays off in terms of overall housekeeping and reducing the amount of time we have to spend in collection storage and certain other areas, certain exhibition areas, taking care of dusting. But outside of the dust issue, much of housekeeping is that's vitally important is going to deal with those daily things that you have at home. Keeping bugs out, keeping the debris from human activity out, those sort of things. And essentially, for a large extent, it's just a matter of common practice carried more extreme. For all of us in the museum, we kind of vacillate between, okay, this was a good day, and absolute panic about one thing or another. But housekeeping, if the most vital aspect of housekeeping is staying on it. A neglected area or a neglected time span is really going to work to detriment later on. It has to be a thing that's in mind every day and is carried out every day. Otherwise, you lose focus, you lose attention to this vital aspect of really providing good stewardship for the artifacts and documents in your various collections. So, that there's not a lot I can tell you that's really arcane knowledge in housekeeping. It's cleanliness, it's behave clean, it's stay on it, and watch out for things that are going to go wrong. With any building, with a boat, for example, a boat can sink as easily with water coming from the top down as it can from the lake coming up into the boat. And the same way with a building, water can come at you from all directions. And if you're not paying attention to alleviating that always, it can quickly get ahead of you and begins to impact collections and exhibitions. So that's one of those areas to pay particular attention to. Water as a direct source of problems on artifacts, and also in terms of increasing humidity will impact the entire space that it occupies. So that's another part of housekeeping that you just absolutely have to stay on, is don't let the roof leak. And I know for a lot of facilities, particularly those historic structures, keeping out leaks is a nonstop problem. So, but it's one that's absolutely vital to maintain the stewardship of the things that we have to take care of. That's about all I have on that. Nicole?
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so Jennifer Holt is our next speaker, and Jennifer is going to talk about triage. So what what do you do when it goes awry? So Jennifer, I am going to go ahead and Jennifer does not have a camera because I told her that I was going to get her one and then I didn't. So sorry about that.
Well, it's both of us. I did bring my laptop, but the camera's not working on it too. So blame us
that was
both.
on me. All right, go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi guys. So now what? We've heard some excellent information about documentation and storage and housekeeping. What if you guys are sitting there and slowly becoming horrified by the fact that you need all of the above, that you are starting at square one and this does not look good? This can be overwhelming. It really can when you're facing a collection, especially one that hasn't been worked in decades, if ever. So what do you do? If you're a fan of Frozen, my recommendation is to do the next right thing, or to borrow another cliche, you're going to eat this elephant one bite at a time. So first, just grab a piece of paper and sit down and make a list. Make a list of everything your collection needs. Anything you can think of, put on that list. It may be 1 page of items, it may be 50, but try and get everything on there. Second, you're going to prioritize that list, and I would recommend doing it by those things that are immediate threats to your collection, and also those things that you currently have the resources to tackle. Put both those things at the top of your list. Third, when you finish your list and you have a item on the very top that you're ready to get at, break it into discrete, finite, actionable pieces. You want these to be small projects that you can finish. So Karen had mentioned an inventory. If you're going to do an inventory, don't just put do inventory on your list. That can take weeks, sometimes months. So break that into individual pieces. How many boxes are you going to do? How many cabinets? How many rooms? Whatever metric makes the most sense for your facility. You want to break this down into pieces so that you can check things off as you complete them. This is something that you really want to be able to keep your volunteer and your staff morale up for. You want to keep the momentum going. It's really easy to diminish both if you just have this very generic do inventory. And then let's say you've been working on it for 3 months and feel like you haven't accomplished anything, even though you've worked every day, because you haven't been keeping track of exactly how much you have completed. So fourth is that keep track of everything you've completed, have a metric, track it all. You want to be able to crow your accomplishments to anyone and everyone, to potential donors, to your board, on grant applications. You want to be able to tell anyone who is interested exactly what you've been doing and just how much you've accomplished. Some further notes about this, baby steps are fine. So you're not going to finish this in a day or a week. If you start to get discouraged, just ask yourself, did I do something that moved my collection in the right direction today? As long as you're moving forward, you are a benefit to that collection. Also, this is one that was very hard for me to learn. Everything we've talked about are best practices, and those need to be your guide star for whatever you're doing. But don't let, again, I'm going to go back to cliches here to paraphrase one. Don't let best practices be the enemy of good enough or good for now. For example, I had a mold outbreak in one of my collection vaults, and our dehumidifiers could not keep up with the humidity. And I was about to pull my hair out. So we had a specialist in preservation environments come in, and the first thing he told me was to turn the heater on, which just blew my mind because you don't want to be heating up your collection. But it's common sense. It was just another tool to try and handle the situation in the short term so that we could come up with a more appropriate long-term solution. So don't miss the forest for the trees. If you can't do something in the ideal way right now, that is fine. Just try and get as close to that as you can with the resources that you have. A final note for me is we are a warm and fuzzy profession. So I highly recommend that you give any of us on the panel today a call if you have any questions. If you come across something, it freaks you out and you need to talk to someone who works in a collection about. And if not us, then just call someone at a museum close to you, whether it's small or large, whether they're volunteers or professional staff. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be thrilled to talk with you about their collection, and they're going to be facing the same kinds of issues. So you can find out a ton of stuff just by picking up the phone and calling a colleague. And I think that is everything from me.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open this up. This is the part that I was really excited about with this session, which is why we did this as a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar. We also have been sitting at like 99 and 100 the entire time, which is the limit, the maximum limit for this session. So I'm worried that there are probably going to be some people who weren't able to get in, but that's okay. We'll have this up on our website next soon here with the recording. So go ahead and unmute yourselves or ask questions in the chat. We really want this to be interactive. You've got 4 just absolutely wonderful folks here that can answer some questions for you. So let's start brainstorming. Let's start talking about some of the issues and problems that you're coming across in your collections if you're at a museum or site, or just questions that you might have.
Nicole, if I can jump in for just a second.
Yes, Jeff.
I want to go back to the beginning of this process where essentially we talked about standards and best practices. And I want to reiterate what it is we're talking about, which is the standards are those things that the museum community in America and around the world essentially considers the standards to aim for, to achieve, to operate under a degree of professionalism that's warranted. Best practices are essentially those tools that you use to achieve that. So that's the kind of quick explanation. That's like, in a way, that's like saying the Bible is essentially a book that says be nice to each other, and that's about it. And the rest of it is all details telling you how to go about the other processes. So that's the very short version of standard and practice.
Yeah. TS was asking about storing, preserving, and displaying silk. Does anyone have any thoughts on the best way to do that?
In our experience, it's often we've received silk items after they've already been destroyed. So the receiving silk items that are in good shape requires some pretty straightforward things. One is, don't make any sharp corners on a piece of silk at all. If a thing needs to be hung or folded, it all has to be rounded over so that there's no stress point on the fabric structure itself. And that can be achieved through rolling, through creating tissue that you roll up into things, so that instead of having a sharp corner, you've got this general rolled over area. And there are certain bugs that are particularly attracted to silk. So at the point that a silk object comes into the collection, you really have to, or would really benefit essentially from a very thorough examination to make sure that you're not moving a dangerous critter into your collection. But it's something that would also benefit from long-term monitoring. Silk is just very attractive to a wide variety of pests.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to housekeeping. It's in storage or exhibition, the less stress you can put on the structure of the silk, the better you are. And silk also benefits from very stable temperatures. So that's something additionally to pay attention to.
We'll add that silk is really, really susceptible to light damage as well. And so, of course, you'll need to be really cognizant of light levels. And then I did add this in the chat, but anybody that didn't see it, we do have a textile conservator here in Oklahoma. Her name is Anne Murray. And I would definitely recommend reaching out to her for really specific details on anything. If you have a certain piece in mind or something like that, I would definitely reach out to her.
And also, she actually worked on a silk piece for us at Will Rogers. It was a piece that had been on display in the light for decades. Of course, all the silk had shattered, and she did a fantastic net overlay on it.
Great. So I recognize some of the names of folks on here, and I know that quite a few of you are not retiring wallflowers. So please ask some questions. You've got some really great people here that are going to be able to answer these. Okay. Does anyone have a mic'd question? If not, I've got a chat question if no one's going to ask anything over the voice. Mueller?
This is Mike Flora. I do have a question.
Okay, great.
In our collection, we have several flags and banners that are made of cotton fabric. And some of them are hanging, some are laying flat. What would be the best way to preserve those cotton banners or flags?
Panelists?
Karen, you gotta talk here.
Sorry,
Don't
Jeff, go
all
ahead.
answer at once,
guys. I was typing a response to the question in the chat. So
Oh, okay.
Well,
I just want to be snarky and say, best way, put them away in a drawer.
yeah, the flat is ideal for flags, but Lordy, how many people have got endless reams of flat, perfect space to lay out flags for storage? Not everybody. If you have a a sizable roll tube that you can interleave tissue paper, acid-free tissue paper, and roll it onto a prepared tube, so that that gives you more storage space for your buck. You don't want to then jam things against each other. The ideal would be to suspend the tube, but that's another way, short of laying a piece perfectly flat for storage.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions from folks? I think,
I've got a question, Nicole.
yeah.
We've got a World War II collection. So obviously the items are 75 plus years old, and we have a number of paper documents. Some are handwritten letters, a number are original issues of newspapers, things of that nature. Currently, the bulk of them are housed inside glass cases, but there's nothing to protect them. Or do I get out of this that maybe at least where we can, we should put them in a some kind of plastic binder or cover where they could still be read, but they're protected from the elements? Or is there a better way to both preserve them yet allow people to read the document?
So we always recommend for displaying original documents and things is that you make a really high quality scan and put the reproduction out, because then, you know, if it gets faded, then you've still got the original. And then if you really did want to put the original out, I mean, you can put it in acid-free Mylar. You just want to make sure they have the indirect lighting on it. And for displaying original stuff, maybe Jeff can answer or Karen can answer more about that. But for preserving the original documents, you really just want to keep them flat in acid-free boxes or any kind of envelope that you can keep light out of it and keep them in relatively low, you know, humidity and cold storage. But yeah, we always recommend putting really high quality reproductions out for display just to protect the originals.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question, Nicole, if I could.
Of course.
And we talked documentation of the collection early on, and if we could go over what we need to document one more time, that's helpful for me to get my notes. But I wrote down, of course, the source of the donation. Our collection is about 25 or 30 years old. So in a few cases, we know the soldier's family that donated. Is that what we're talking about, the source of the collection, or you're looking for more information like this was a 1942 M11 bayonet, or what do we actually need to document in terms of documenting an object in the collection?
Well, everything. But the person that you got the piece from is the donor. So the history of the object would be like it's a 1940 bayonet from blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so you need to know the history of the piece, because you can't interpret a piece in an exhibit if you don't have context. Otherwise, it's just a piece on a shelf and it doesn't differentiate a museum from an antique store. So you need to have context. So it's really important to capture everything you can about an object. So we want to know the date. We want to know who it came from. We want to know how they got it. So that's provenance. And just really everything. We want to know what it looks like. So that's something when you're, if you're using a database or even an Excel spreadsheet to talk about that bayonet, we want to know the dimensions on the bayonet. We want to know what material it's made out of, what color it is, everything like that. So we want to get all the information.
So I've seen a question in the chat here that I think it'll work for a couple of different levels of things. So, and this is probably a Mallory question. So someone's received a scrapbook that has different types of materials, so newspapers, photographs, copy paper. How do you organize, like once you've digitized that, do you keep the scrapbook together, or do you separate those items out based on their original, you know, type of documentation?
So that really kind of depends on the condition that the scrapbook is in. If it's in a really good condition, then usually we just keep everything together because we want to preserve the context of the scrapbook. Like the person who put it together in that way for a certain reason. So we really don't want to lose that. But you can also, if you've got newspaper clippings or things that are really acidic in nature in there, you can put acid-free paper in between the newspapers, and especially if there's photographs on opposite pages, you can do that. Or if the scrapbook is really kind of falling apart, or you've lost the binding or something, you can take those apart. I just would make sure to keep the pages in order, number them somehow. If you've digitized it, that's a good record of how they are. And so you can either take them apart or keep them together, depending on kind of the condition that the scrapbook is in. Or sometimes if you don't have a box that's big enough to fit one, or you don't have a place, then maybe it's easier and better for the scrapbook that you do take it apart. So there's just some, variables that you have to take into account.
Great. This is another question about, or not another, but this is a question about humidity levels. And I think it will be applicable to a lot of people on here. So I want to go ahead and get this asked. Humidity levels in their historic house have been actually really low lately. And it seems like she's worried that a standard humidifier would increase the humidity too much, and wants to know if there's a good, reasonably inexpensive option to keep the humidity from being too low. Anyone, literally any of you guys can answer.
If your budget is perfect, there's a.
Let's pretend like it's not. Let's pretend like their budget's not perfect, like all of us here.
Well, then stay with the humidifier and make sure the air circulates in the house wherever possible, whether that's fans or the HVAC system fan itself, whatever you've got. The circulation of air is going to be vitally important. That way you don't end up with pockets that are particularly dry or particularly moist. Getting to high humidity is generally more scary than low humidity, and because of the potential for mold. But you're approaching the time of year now where in the house, a historic house, the humidity levels are going to come zooming up. It's that mid-January through mid-March period that faces the lowest humidity points in the average home. And so it's not something you're going to have to deal with forever, another month, and you're going to have to look at, the humidity is a little bit too high. So for now, just a room type dehumidifier unit or humidifier unit is really going to be very helpful.
Great. Thank you. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add that just like what Briley said, it's more important to keep the humidity stable because changes in humidity, like the fluctuations there, are what is damaging. So as long as you can keep it relatively stable, that is more important than bringing it up at this point. And so you can actually get some really cheap hygrometers to stick in the space and just kind of monitor it. You just want to avoid those extreme fluctuations.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? All right, so here's what I want to pose to all of you guys. And if anyone has a question, again, that's fine. You can just interrupt me. I don't care. So if you had, let's say you had $200, okay? Or like something, maybe even 500, like not a whole lot of money, okay? 200, let's go with 200. And you guys were starting almost from scratch, right? You had a collection. What would be the things that you would prioritize purchasing to help stabilize your collection? Would it be monitors, humidity monitors? Would it be archival boxes? Let's just assume you have a mix of archival and three-dimensional objects, okay? Go. What do you guys think is what do you guys think are your priorities for things that people should be having to preserve their collections properly?
You're not going to get you're not going to get many archival boxes for $200. So I probably wouldn't go that direction. I would probably do things like acid-free paper tags, because that is something that we've run into a lot here, just because we have a large collection that is not fully accessioned. So we have a lot of things right now we just need to tag. So I would definitely invest in things like that, just to make visual inspection and tracking a lot easier.
Okay. Anything else?
Maybe some like brushes, some Japanese hake brushes or something like that for some gentle dusting and that kind of thing.
Well, and you're not going to be able to get a database or even just a cheap laptop with spreadsheets on it for that. So definitely you want some notepads, because you need to document everything. And if you have to do that with a pen and paper, then that's what you've got to do.
Or pencil and paper.
Yeah. Yes.
But you don't want pens in the collections area, Karen?
No.
Well, and I think for archival stuff, you're going to want to get some kind of envelope or folders or things, because if you've got photos floating around, or like little pieces of paper or something, you're going to want to have something to collect all that, even if it's just like a manila mailing envelope that you can label and keep everything together. That's something that you can do for cheap that will help you keep everything together.
Right. And that's great. I think that's important to remind people that, we're always told what the best practices are, but it's better to have something in a plastic box than on the floor, in just sitting on the floor. It's better to have something in a box on a shelf rather than sitting on the floor. It's better to have it in some type of envelope rather than just loose, where it could have something spill on it or a water drip fall onto it. So I think sometimes people get so wrapped up in what's the absolute best thing to do that they maybe get a little frozen and don't take some of just the basic steps to make sure that they're preserving their collection even temporarily.
And I will say that we invested in some plastic rolls of plastic, because we're in an old warehouse, and so they have redone the roof this spring, and we had a lot of debris come down, and so we had actually draped our collection prior to that, and so we were able to mitigate a lot of that. Otherwise we would have had a major mess on our hands. But so just sometimes it's things like that just protects enough.
Jeff?
As to standards and practices, those are going to change over time. So it's great to move as fast as you can towards those. Just know that in all probability, museum people are going to know more in the future than we know now. And a great example I've been piddling with this last week points out that originally with the Historical Society, the idea was to get the thing, and that was it. And so the worst records for objects that we have pertain to the oldest objects in the collection, and it's just awful. I was dealing with essentially the shield that was the design for the state flag of Oklahoma. We know who contributed it. We know the name of the person who owned it originally. We know the date that it was donated. That's it. And you look at that and you go, well, this is really one of those seminally significant objects within the state of Oklahoma. Out of all the treasures we hold for the citizens of the state, this one's really important. And so it's only through chasing other sources as hard as you can go for sometimes for years that you find out more answers to an object's history. And then I am sometimes as guilty as the next person in that I haven't written down some of those details that I find out. The collections files on any given object, any chance you have to add to that information is absolutely gold for somebody at the museum in the future. And really much of what we do, whether it's for the patrons of the museum or the abilities and comfort of future curators, is to work really for those people in the future.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, we have time for just one more question because we have another session at 3 o'clock on strategic planning that I'm also working on. So does anyone have one last question to ask of our panelists before we close out? I promise they won't bite. Everyone's shy. All right, going. Now, I will make sure, Mallory, can you go ahead and put your file, the PowerPoint into the chat here? If you don't mind.
Yes.
Great. And then, Karen, when you were talking earlier, you were talking about, did you already put that in the chat? No, you didn't. You were talking about your checklist and
yes.
collections plan. If you've got that handy, if you could put it in the chat, great. If you don't, I'm going to be asking, or I'm going to talk to Jennifer Towery about putting all of this up on the grants website on Monday, because she's a little busy right now running this virtual conference. But on Monday, if you guys need any of those resources, I'll have this session and all of the material available on okhistory.org/grants, which is the Oklahoma Heritage Preservation Grants webpage on our site. So anyways, thank you guys so much to our panelists for joining us. Thank you everyone for being on the Zoom call. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you guys at some more sessions as we continue our virtual conference. So thank you guys so much. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.